I'd like to introduce Dr. Taruskin, who received Kyoto Prize Art and Philosophy this year. Dr. Taruskin, thank you very much for your time. We know you have a very busy schedule.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to sincerely congratulate you on receiving Kyoto Prize.
Thank you.
Yesterday. So
it was yesterday, yes.
Yeah, one day had passed. So how do you feel now?
Oh, well, I feel a little better now because I've had more time to recover from jet lag.
Yeah.
Of course, it's been a wonderful honor. And particularly I appreciate it because the previous winners in music have all been composers and performers, and this is the first time a musicologist has been honored. And I think it's the first time a musicologist has ever been given an award like this. And so it's a kind of recognition of musicology.
Yes.
And particularly precious to me is that it's a recognition of musicology as an aspect of music, not just of scholarship.
Yeah.
Because all musicologists are indeed trained musicians. And we do think of what we do as an aspect of musical practice. The commentary is a large part of what keeps music going. It always has been. And so we see ourselves as playing a vital role. And the Inamori Foundation seems to agree. Yeah. So we're very grateful. I should say I'm very grateful. And I hope I can speak on behalf of my fellow musicologists when I say that.
Looking back, your childhood, so what's the type of kid you were used to be that you
What kind of a kid was I? Very studious kid. As I said today in my lecture, from about the age of 5 or 6, I knew that I wanted to be a professor.
At the age of 5 or 6?
Yes, I went to school and never stopped. I never wanted to get out. And so here I am.
I see. So what made you to decide to become a professor at the age of 5 or 6? Too young, I think.
Well, I would have been too young to be appointed then, yes. Well, I just loved the idea of it. I loved the idea of expanding my knowledge. I was always a very curious kid. I was interested in learning everything. I always did things that emphasized, acquiring knowledge. I was never much for sports. I loved reading books. I collected stamps. I did all kinds of things that brainy kids did.
I learned your mother was a pianist.
A piano teacher, yes.
Piano teacher, and your father is also
He was musical. He played the violin, but he was a lawyer.
Lawyer, he's a lawyer. So you are in the circumstance of...
Yes, there was always music in the house. And from a very early age, I knew that one day I would play the cello. Because my father played violin, my mother played piano. They wanted a trio. So I knew that this was in my future. And it finally happened when I was 11. I started playing cello.
Usually, I think I'm one of the music-loving people. That's why I became a radio personality. And the other persons became a musical player, and they're satisfied with it. But you get more, right? You became a professional performer.
I did, yes.
And then you go advance more, you get more. So what made you to decide to become a musicologist?
I explained this in my lecture today, and it was a very circuitous, unpredictable thing. I became a musicologist because I failed to get a job as a performer. There was a group of early music performers in New York called the New York Pro Musica. In 1970, they had an opening for a string player. I had just started playing viola da gamba. And I auditioned for a position in the New York Musica, which was the one early music ensemble in the United States that could pay its members a living wage. So it was a real professional job.
Yes.
So I auditioned, and a friend of mine who played the lute auditioned. And it took them a month to decide between us, but they gave her the job. So I went back to graduate school and finished my degree. And then about 15 years later, long after the New York Per Musica had disbanded, the friend of mine who had beaten me to get the job in the New York Per Musica came to me. I was by then the director of graduate studies at Columbia University in musicology. She applied for admission to the program. So I thought, wow, I was lucky.
You were lucky.
If I'd gotten the job when I wanted it so much, I'd be the one petitioning for admission and she'd be the one sitting behind the desk. So if I'd gotten that job with the New York Per Musica, I might very well not have become a musicologist.
Oh, I see.
But I went back to school, and the great satisfactions I began to have in scholarship began then. So I became serious at that point.
I see. Is there anyone who influenced you a lot to become a musicologist?
Well, certainly. There were my teachers. I studied with the man who was, I think, the most famous musicologist in the world at the time I was studying with him. His name was Paul Henry Lang, and he actually did something that I later did myself. He was very well known, not only because he published scholarly books, but because he was the daily music reviewer for the New York Herald Tribune, which was next to the New York Times, the most prestigious newspaper in New York in those days. It doesn't exist anymore. But he combined music criticism with musicology, and later on I did that too. I wasn't necessarily thinking of him when I began doing that, but he was a role model for me that way. And then when I went to California and joined the faculty of the University of California at Berkeley, one of my colleagues there was Joseph Kerman, who was another musicologist who was very interested in criticism. And that was a more direct influence on me.
I see.
And I have practiced both styles of writing. The historical research, the formal presentation, all of that which you regard as scholarship. And I've also written commentary for the New York Times and several large circulation magazines.
The book you wrote, the Oxford History of Western Music, I was very surprised to see that. It's over 4,000 pages.
In 5 volumes.
In 5 volumes?
Yes.
How long did it take?
Well, it's hard to say because from the time I wrote the first words until I wrote the last words, I would say it was about 13 years. That was the first draft. Then came a long production process, which you would have to add to those 13 years. And then there was all of my life up until the point when I began writing, which is what prepared me to do it.
This might be a silly question, but did you have time to be in trouble writing something, or did you feel like giving up or something?
Well, fortunately, I had trained myself to be very regular. This is something I preach to my students, so I am going to practice it. And so I always think of Tchaikovsky, who once said that I sit down at my desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and the muse has learned to be on time. So I forced myself to sit down and write every single day. I believe that that's the only way you can achieve a big project. Just the regularity with which you work. Of course, there were plenty of times when I didn't think it was going as well as I wanted it to.
Do you have any episodes in terms of writing?
Episodes?
Yes.
Like writer's block?
Yes.
Never had writer's block. I think it's because I had this routine. I never gave into it. There were days I didn't feel like writing, obviously. Many such days. But then I remembered what a man named Samuel Butler, an English novelist, once said. He said, a professional is somebody who can do his job when he doesn't feel like it. And so I always thought of that. I thought you have to sit down and do it every day, whether you feel like it or not. And when you don't feel like it, you don't write as well. But you have a chance to go over it and improve it. So another thing I used to always say to myself is, you have to write it, and then later on you can erase it, and I always tell this to my students, and some of them have caught this habit of writing. And so if I don't do it,
In that sense, you're a real professional, I think.
Well, yes, in that sense, I will acknowledge that I'm a professional because I don't have to feel like doing it in order to do it.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't wait for inspiration. I don't even believe in inspiration. I think that inspiration is the kind of enthusiasm that comes when you're doing it.
Yeah, I see. In relating to the contents of that book, authenticity, that's one of my headaches. It's quite difficult for me to understand. So would you kindly explain it to me in a simple...
Well, first of all, I have a reputation for being against authenticity, but nobody should be against authenticity. Authenticity is a virtue. Authenticity is being genuine. Authenticity is being true to your feelings, you know. Unfortunately, the word authenticity was used in a different way in describing the performance of early music. The claim was made, or it used to be made, that certain performers were performing authentically because they were performing the music exactly the way it was performed when it was new, 200, 300 years ago. And what I managed to show was that that could not be true. And that their performance style was not that of many years ago, but was actually a performance style that was heavily influenced by modern ideas. And I always said that made it more authentic, not less, because it was truly an expression of our time and truly an expression of their taste, although they were claiming that it was something else. So, as you can imagine, nobody ever thanked me for telling them this. But I think that's become more or less the consensus now, that we shouldn't be claiming that we're doing something that they did 300 years ago, where we can have no direct evidence of what they did that long ago because there were no sound recordings. And all we can do is make conjectures based on descriptions of performances or treatises on how to play instruments and things like that. And in order to fill all the gaps that are left when all you're going on is literary evidence or pictorial evidence, you have to rely on your own taste. You have to rely on your sense of what sounds good. And our idea of what sounds good is based on experiences that we've had since the 18th century. And particularly a lot of the theorizing that came in the early 20th century, after the First World War, when everybody turned against romantic ways of thinking, expressing oneself. So I associated what they called authenticity in performance with the modernism of the early 20th century rather than the 18th century.
I see.
But I still think it's authentic. Just, know it really is and act in accordance with that.
I see. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Thank you very much. Now I understand.
I hope so.
So, about turning point, in your researcher life, would you tell me any turning point?
In my research life, a turning point? Well, I'll tell you one enormously lucky break that I had. I wanted to write a book about Stravinsky, who I always thought of as the most interesting Russian composer and the most interesting 20th century composer. But I could never hope to write the book I eventually wrote because I didn't have access to the sources that I needed. Stravinsky kept his manuscripts all his life. And when he died, his manuscripts went into litigation. There was a lawsuit between two sides among his heirs, his children against his widow, who was not their mother, but his second wife, and his assistant, whose name was Robert Kraft. And because of this lawsuit, nobody could have access to this material because it didn't have a resting place. It didn't have a repository. But during the lawsuit, the New York court system awarded temporary custodianship of the Stravinsky archive to the New York Public Library. And somebody told me about this. and also told me that the New York Public Library would be willing to let me have access as long as they were in control of it. So all of a sudden I had access to the entire Stravinsky archive when I lived only 10 minutes away from it by subway, and when I was beginning a sabbatical. So I had a whole year to do nothing but study those manuscripts. So this was really a tremendous thing for me.
As a turning point.
Oh, it was a turning point.
So this is the final question. I eagerly to hear from you a message to a younger generation, especially who wants to be a researcher.
Well, I hope there will still be work for you. There is a crisis in hiring in the humanities, especially in the academy, I should say, especially in the humanities. Budgets are getting much tighter. There are fewer and fewer permanent positions available. I have to tell students, well, I don't have students right now, but when I was finishing my career as a professor, I had to warn my students that, if you're really good, I think you can still get a job, but it's more difficult than it was when I was a student. And there are less rich prospects for employment. And so, and because we have programs and we maintain them, we tend to overproduce scholars. So there are more trained scholars than there are positions for them. So my hope for the future is that somehow we will resolve this difficulty. One of the ways in which I think we will resolve the difficulty is to stop associating the academic study of music with the study of classical music. Classical music no longer has the social prestige that it once had. Certainly in Europe and in the Americas. It has more social prestige, of course, in Japan.
Yes.
We like to say, or maybe we don't like to say it, but we have to say it, that Western music is going east. It's tremendous now in Japan, in South Korea, in China. And if you go to any conservatory in Europe or the United States, you'll find that half to 2/3 of the students are from East Asia.
You said that tolerance is a keyword for younger generation.
Tolerance, be tolerant. Yes, I think we should be tolerant of each other's ideas.
Okay.
And
be tolerant.
Tolerant
is a message to a younger generation.
Well, if I have to give them a message, I could do worse than that one.
Yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Taruskin.